continue our conversation now, let's bring in our political observers. Susan Smith is principal with Blue Sky Strategy Group, Kate Harrison, vice chair with Summa Strategies, and Kim Wright, principal for Wright Strategies. Hello to the three of you.
Good to be here.
Hello.
So I want to begin here with the last point that was made by the minister, and the point I was making to him as well in our interview. The question as to whether or not the government's credibility on security has essentially been diminished by the awarding of an RCMP communications contract to a company that has ties to the Chinese government. Now, that deal has been already rescinded, but it does go down to, I guess, an issue of credibility. Susan, what do you think of it?
Michael, I had a two-word tweet when I saw this story yesterday, and it was my two words were monumentally stupid. This goes right to the heart of the officials, I think, who are looking at this project, and it goes to the heart of our procurement process here. We unfortunately have a process in Canada at the moment where it's lowest price for some projects, and that's what happened here, and nobody did their proper homework at the officials level. So I think the government has taken the right steps to cancel this contract. I think it's got to go further and get this technology ripped out. And Minister Champagne just yesterday in the House of Commons announced new updates to the Investment Canada Act that's going to require much more heightened review of these kinds of things and of these kinds of projects. And that it's disappointing that it happened. It's beyond a head scratcher. It's a slam forehead into palm of hand. But the government has to get smarter, and the government includes the officials who are looking at these things. The ministers' offices aren't looking at $500,000 contracts, which was the value of this contract. So this is incumbent on the independent public service to do their jobs too.
Mm-hmm. Kate, what do you make of it? Because, to hear it from the opposition, they basically say this proves that the government really is not backing up their own words when it comes to taking a tougher stance against countries like China.
Well, and this is just the latest example, Michael, of that being the case. This is not a one-off situation where the government made a whoopsie to a contractor. There's, of course, the longstanding issues with Huawei, our heel dragging on that, despite other Five Eyes countries deciding very early on that we were going to have Huawei technology. Chinese-owned enterprises were able to access some of the COVID benefits that Canadians were receiving, the wage subsidy benefits. So you speak about credibility, and that question to the minister is an important one. The pattern of behavior of this government not taking action on this soon enough has really made this a challenge. This is a pattern of behavior of them not taking security credentials seriously when they're looking at procurement. I'm glad to see the rules that are coming into effect, but I think a lot of people rightly are saying that it's too little too late.
Well, Kim, what's your take on it? Because, if not for the Agile Canada report, would the rest of the country have known about this deal? There's also that part of the report that essentially says that the main competitor for this contract was a Quebec-based company, and that, and this picks up on Susan's point, that the bid from the Quebec company was only $60,000 more. What's your reaction?
Yeah, so much of procurement feels these days like it's penny wise, pound foolish. And when we see that discrepancy of about $60,000 for a Canadian-based company that could have not only done the job, but just as well as the other company, there should be metrics in place that look at the value add to the country when they're looking at communications and any sort of procurement. This is not a new thing. This is just an increasingly frustrating thing. And what I find interesting, Michael, and this goes back to a bigger problem of procurement across the country, not just when we talk about foreign countries, but there isn't enough light shed on who is purchasing, who is procuring, and politicians and bureaucrats have taken the sort of don't ask us any questions because you have to have ill intentions when you do it. Sometimes procurement actually does need to have a light shone on it to see who's bidding, how they're bidding, how are these going through. And I think that that's part of the overhaul that needs to happen, not just in this instance, but across the country.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I want to switch over to guns right now because, as you know, big issue this week, the Prime Minister saying that his government is still very much committed to banning assault-style firearms and adding those amendments into their gun bill. Kate, there is apparently a fine-tuning happening based on the criticism that's been raised about this bill. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of this heartache at this point for the government could have been avoided by more robust consultation at the outset. There was a lot of criticism when the bill was first introduced that it was too far reaching. And now you're hearing groups like the AFN, for instance, step up and say, this is not going to respect the hunters and anglers in the Indigenous community, and it casts too broad of a net. So there is a lot of consensus on the importance of tackling gun violence. Where there's less consensus is whether or not 21 is the right way to do it. And how will this meaningfully crack down on the real issue, which is firearms coming in from the United States, illegal handguns, already illegal weapons, as opposed to punishing law-abiding firearm owners. So I think they went out a bit too far on 21, and had they consulted broader earlier, they would be avoiding this legislative hiccup now.
Kim, I think it's very interesting to watch this debate happening because, of course, historically New Democrats have called for gun control, but the amendments have party members in more rural parts of this country fighting back. How difficult is this issue for the NDP to navigate?
Well, it's interesting. It's taken the Liberal government since 2015 to create legislation that really just isn't going to solve any of the crime-related issues that we have in this country, including, as Kate mentioned, the porous border that we have that continues to allow illegal guns to come across this country, which is what 80% of the gun crimes that are happening in this country are. And former Chief Blair certainly knows that. He can certainly talk to this with great eloquence when he chooses to. And clearly, when writing this bill, no one in the government has chosen to figure out how we actually get a gun crime in this country. And part of that is, and not to be, discharitable this time of year, but they're not interested in getting at these major issues. The government is looking at scoring cheap political points. If people were actually interested in settling gun crime issues, we would have a much more robust plan. We would have a border security measure. We would have economic incentives for people in communities so they're not turning to guns and gangs issues. And so what we're seeing in the backlash of this is entirely predictable. What I didn't have on my bingo card on the gunnies issue was Carey Price wading into this and having to, and the coalition of firearms rights, so-called, cheapening this issue by any stretch of the imagination by using poly as a merch code, especially coming as we are this week on the anniversary of École Polytechnique and the femicide that happened in that instance. There is no reason that Corey Price did not know this. Certainly the Montreal Canadiens have had to educate him, as have a number of other folks. And this coalition, frankly, whoever thought that was a good merch code should give their damn hat a shake.
Susan, I wonder whether or not the Liberals are going to have to walk back the amendments at this point, because there is the opposition from hunters. There's now the opposition from the AFN, which just came out today, this week, and there's also the opposition even within the Liberal backbench. Will the government have to walk back those amendments?
I think you'll see some fine-tuning of those amendments. The Prime Minister said there's going to be more consulting, but the bottom line is a bill that restricts handguns, a bill that restricts assault rifles or assault weapons is a good thing. I think the implementation of the last amendment has been clumsy, and there have been some legit hunters who own legit shotguns and rifles that have been captured in this, and that needs to be walked back. Kate talked about further consultation. I think they should have done more of that. But to say, new legislation or any legislation, I think, that restricts the access and condemns the legality of these kinds of weapons, I think is a good thing in the country. That doesn't mean there aren't more measures that need to take place. But I think it's difficult to be against legislation that restricts the access of assault rifles. I understand how hunters could be upset. And so let's define what those specific guns are. But Kim referred to the sector or the industry and the lobby and the gun lobby. And that's a very wily industry who has come up with lots of ways to modify guns and make certain weapons assault rifles by increasing the magazines and the rapidity at which guns can, ammunition can be fired. That's what the government is trying to capture. The government is supportive of hunters, absolutely. They're supportive of people being able to go on the land and do their traditional hunting, or for people who do it recreationally. There's no question, and who do it safely with with safe and legal weapons. But we've got to get rid of assault weapons. We don't need them.
Really, one last go around here, because I do want to get this topic. So quick answers from all of you, because I think it's important to acknowledge that Alberta has passed its Sovereignty Act now. And I'm wondering, how does that change, should it change, the way Ottawa does business with Alberta going forward? Susan, quickly.
Well, I think it's a case-by-case basis. There's a provincial election in Alberta next year, early next year. I think the government of Alberta thinking it can override federal law is fallacy, and I think there's going to be a lot of activity in court if they choose to actually activate and implement this law.
Kate?
Yeah, I think that it should give the federal government some pause in terms of their relationship with the province, their relationship with Saskatchewan. What we see here with the implementation of this is Alberta saying that they're looking for some of the protection and sovereignty, frankly, that provinces like Quebec have been given for some time. I suspect that we'll see a lot of use of this in the next 6 months, given the election timing. So we'll see how the implementation rolls out compared to the legislation that's now passed.
Kim, quickly to you.
I think we're rapidly approaching a conversation about what do we need to do to both keep the country together and reframe our constitution. I am, well, concerned about the Sovereignty Act, more concerned that the Prime Minister this week basically passed the buck on any sort of funding for municipalities, or picking up the heavy load on many of the federal government's promises, including on housing, and saying, don't ask us for money. That's the province's responsibility. You're creatures of the province. I think we need to have a bigger conversation about how do we get that funding mechanism on the way beyond the politics of what's happening with Danielle Smith and her Sovereignty Act. Okay, well, good to get your thoughts on the matter. In fact, all the matters today. Susan Smith, Kate Harrison, Kim Wright, really appreciated having the three of you today. Thank you.
Thank you.